year 1488 in Cordova. On a bright day in the summer of 1488, a small, round-faced Catalina of Aragon, who was 2½ was dressed in her best brocaded silk dress, stiff with jewels, sitting beside her mother, Queen Isabella, at the bull-ring in Medina del Campo. For the first time she was seeing a bullfight. First the matadors and then the picadors came riding in. Then in came the toreador with his flaming cape. Then came the brave black bull who lunged at the dancing man with the red cape. His sword flashed. Everyone cried, "Olé, olé!" and the black bull was dead. Next to her mother sat some strange gentleman who peered at her and smiled at her and called her the little Princess of Wales. The strange gentlemen, who were from England, had good reason to smile. They had just made a valuable alliance for their king, Henry VII, by arranging a marriage between Arthur, Prince of Wales, who would soon be 2, and little Catherine of Aragon. Her dowry of 200,000 crowns would be a tidy sum for the King of England. Ferdinand, for his part, was not too enthusiastic about the alliance with England's new king. In view of their recent history and the reputation of the English for being treacherous people, he was not sure how long Henry VII would last. However, that would be proven before the actual marriage took place. So the bargain was signed and sealed. And little round-faced Catalina was to grow up knowing that when she was old enough, she would go to live in England and marry Arthur, the Prince of Wales. In Cordova, that same year, 1488, a son was born on August 15th to Beatriz Enriquez de Harana and Christopher Columbus. He was given the name of a saint, which was also that of the king, Fernando, or Ferdinand. This was Ferdinand Columbus, who in the last years of his life was to write the history of his beloved and illustrious father. In the year 1488, however, the year of Ferdinand's birth, Christopher Columbus was far from illustrious. For 2 years he had been waiting for Isabella's committees to pass on his enterprise, and no report had been made. Now the sovereigns had cut off his allowance. They seemed to have lost all interest in him. Why should he wait any longer and starve while he waited? Why not go back to Portugal? 3 years had passed since he had come to Spain. The Portuguese had not yet found the way around the end of Africa to India. They might be ready now to let him prove that he could get to India by sailing west. He decided to go and wrote a letter to King John, which reached him at just the right time, just before the exciting news reached Portugal that his ships had rounded the Cape of Good Hope. Early in the year 1488, Bartholomew Diaz had discovered the Cape of Good Hope. The sea route to India had been found, but the successful explorer had not yet returned to Portugal when King John received the letter from Columbus. Bartholomew Diaz, a skillful navigator and a most trustworthy man, had sailed from Lisbon in the summer of 1487 to search again for the southern end of Africa and the entrance to the Indian Ocean. Possibly King John was then inclined to send out another explorer in a different direction. Certainly he wrote a most cordial reply to Columbus, calling him his particular friend and urging him to come to Portugal immediately. For some unknown reason, Columbus, as delighted as he must have been with the letter, did not go immediately. It was late in the year when he left Cordova, and it was December before he set his shabby bags and books down in his brother's shop in Lisbon. And in that very month of December, what did Columbus see? The ships of Bartholomew Diaz sailing into the harbor of Lisbon with the great news that the long-sought-for sea route to India had been found. Columbus was present when Bartholomew Diaz made his report describing the voyage to King John. It had taken about 6 months to reach the end of Africa, which they found 1,400 miles farther south than the last padreo erected by Diogo Cam. They were then in very cold and treacherous waters, and had rounded the final cape without knowing it, blown about in such a violent storm that for 2 weeks the sailors scarcely hoped to survive. But when the storm abated, the shoreline could be seen, running east and west instead of north and south. Landing on that southernmost point of Africa, they erected a padreo on the windy but beautiful cape, to be known as the Cape of Good Hope. Bartholomew Diaz was sadly disappointed, however, that having gone so far, he could not complete the voyage to India. After sailing on a few miles past the Cape, the officers advised him most strongly to turn back. He did so with such deep regret that he made each man sign a paper that they had made the decision. One of the officers said that as they were leaving Cape Good Hope behind, Commander Diaz stood watching the padreo disappear with as much sorrow as if he were leaving a son in exile. Columbus was most impressed by the data and charts which Bartholomew Diaz had brought to show the king, particularly as he saw in them added proof of what the French geographer said about the proportion of land and water on the globe. He talked of it to his brother when he returned to the shop. Opening his copy of the Geography Imago Mundi to the proper page, he wrote this note in the margin. Note that in the year December of this year, 1488, Bartholomeus Didymus, commander of the 3 caravels which the King of Portugal had sent out, landed in Lisbon. He reported that he had reached a promontory which he called Cabo de Boa Esperança. He described his voyage and plotted it league by league on a marine chart, in order to place it under the eyes of said king. I was present in all of this. Closing the book, he waited for his industrious brother Bartholomew to look up from the map on which he was working. It was obvious, they agreed, that since the Portuguese had now discovered their own way to India, King John was not going to be interested in searching for another route. Who would be? What other ruler? What about Henry VII of England? Possibly Anne of France. She was known to be a collector of maps and a woman of great intelligence and imagination. It was finally decided that Bartholomew should go first to England, and if Henry VII did not respond, he would go on to Paris to see Anne of France. Since there was still some slight hope that Ferdinand and Isabella might finance the venture, Columbus returned to Spain. Back in Cordova, Columbus resigned himself to more of the same waiting, praying, and hoping for a favorable report from the committee, into being pointed out and scoffed at as a crackpot clinging to a crazy notion. What else he did, how he got enough to live, is a question. It was a time in his life too miserable for him ever to recall. One more long year dragged itself to an end, and at last, in 1490, the committee handed in their report, and just as the scoffers predicted, it was unfavorable. The sovereigns were advised not to favor an affair which appeared impossible to any educated person, however little learning he might have. They gave the following reasons. Number 1. A voyage to India would require 3 years. Number 2. The Western Ocean was infinite and perhaps unnavigable. Number 3. If one reached the other side of the globe, he could not get back. Number 4. There was no land there, because St. Augustine had said that 3/4 of the globe was covered with water. Number 5. So many centuries after the world was created, it was not likely any unknown land of value would be found. In short, the committee, after due deliberation, considered the project of Columbus impossible, vain, and worthy of rejection. Ferdinand and Isabella, however, told Columbus that he might bring it to their attention later, if he cared to, when the war with Granada was over and they had more time to consider it. At that time, they were also busy with preparations for the wedding of their first daughter, the Infanta Isabel, to Prince Alfonso, son of King John of Portugal, to whom she had been betrothed for 11 years. The Infanta was married by proxy with pomp and ceremony in Seville, after which the bride traveled in state to Lisbon, where the marriage was repeated in November 1490. A few months later, young Alfonso was killed in an accident, and a young, sorrowful widow returned to her sympathetic parents, who were also distressed that the alliance with Portugal had so suddenly collapsed. Columbus, meanwhile, was waiting month after month for that possible sometime when the sovereigns might feel free enough to reconsider his enterprise. Clinging to this thin thread of hope, he read and reread his books, especially his favorite volume, The Travels of Marco Polo, filling the margin of the books with many notes. He kept studying the map, refiguring the distance Marco Polo traveled across Asia to China, estimating again the distance he himself must sail westward across the ocean to reach the land of the Great Khan. As he did so, he kept building up more and more confidence that it could be done. The Mongol ruler Kublai Khan, who had conquered China in 1264, was the great Khan whom Marco Polo visited, and whom he had called the mightiest man who has ever been, from Adam, our first parent, down to the present moment. Less than 100 years, however, after the death of the mighty Kublai Khan, the Chinese had overthrown the Mongol rulers and established their own imperial Chinese dynasty of Ming. So, although Columbus and all other Europeans still talked about the great Khan of China, there had been no Khan in China, great or otherwise, for over a century.